assessing for and healing fatigue is one of the most critical skills you need as a health and wellness practitioner, because so much of the population is exhausted all the time. And there's a lot of underlying reasons. In today's episode, I'm talking to Dr. Evan Hirsch about his process for helping people with fatigue. As an MD, classically trained, he has jumped ship and looked for other ways because the standard medical approach to helping people assess and fix their fatigue don't work. This is a recording of a podcast episode, so we're going to jump right into the interview with him. And you don't have to be watching. There's nothing to watch. You can just be listening in. So listen in the background while you exercise, while you cook, and get the critical information and the critical skills you need to help your clients heal their fatigue.
So let's just talk about, why do you think low energy and fatigue are actually at such epidemic proportions?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the toxins that we accumulate throughout our lives. And as we know, the world has become increasingly more toxic, more heavy metals, more chemicals, etc. And consequently, that has caused more fatigue and other symptoms. We're seeing increase incidence of so many other different diseases as well. And fatigue really is kind of like the harbinger. It's the canary in the coal mine where, if you're having issues now, it's because you've got these toxins that need to be removed. Otherwise, you're going to have issues later with heart attacks, heart disease, strokes, Alzheimer's, and cancer.
Well, okay, so that leads us into, fatigue is there, right? It's a warning sign. It sounds like that something's out of balance. And, a lot of people think about fatigue as just like, I don't have the energy to go dancing, or I don't have the energy to do whatever. But really, it's a lot more than that, right? Because it's affecting the underlying tissues and organs and glands.
Absolutely. It's a message, and so we're so used to pushing through. I know for me, I had been very disconnected from my body. This is some of the work that I've been doing for the last several years, but very disconnected from my body because I've been pushing through for so long. I ended up with chronic fatigue for 5 years before I fixed it, and I still have to watch myself from pushing through when I'm not maybe at my optimal, or maybe when I'm tired, So yeah, it is a message that we need to pay attention to because it's telling us that there's something wrong in the body, and it's not time to grab another Coke or 5-hour energy or caffeinated beverage in order to be able to get through it.
Right. And that's what I was thinking as you started to say that. That's what people do. And that's what they're told to do by their doctors or whatever other practitioners they may be seeing. They're told, oh, don't worry about it. Just say those 5-hour energy drinks are good, or pop some B vitamins, or, take some extra caffeine, eat some more sugar to give you energy. And those are actually things that are causing it to get worse, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And those are really Band-Aids. And even, naturally when we're looking at some of this, and we're boosting adrenals and we're boosting mitochondria and boosting thyroid and boosting sex hormones and all that, they're still Band-Aids, because the reality is that the reason why we have those deficiencies is because we've got toxins on board, which I know we'll get into in a bit, but we're talking about things like heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, etc.
Yeah. And, before we get into that, I just want to point out and get your opinion on, we've been in this health crisis for the last 3 years, and that people are blaming bugs, right? They're blaming a virus, they're blaming this and that. And in reality, how much does this underlying cellular fatigue actually contribute to that epidemic?
Well, it's huge. Once again, it's the accumulation of everything over time, so, part of my story was that, you come out and you get toxins from mom through the placenta, and then I ate a lot of gluten and dairy growing up, and I pooped once a week for the first 20 some odd years of my life, so I couldn't get rid of toxins out of my body, and then lived in a moldy place and grew up in New Jersey, so I was bitten by ticks, and then kissed somebody with Epstein-Barr virus, right? So you get all of this, and so if, somebody gets the pandemic virus and then they start to get symptoms, it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. But there was all this other stuff that happened first.
That happened first. Absolutely. So cellular energy is like critical for just about everything, right? We talk about immune system. They have to be able to handle your Epstein-Barr exposure, your tick exposure, the COVID exposures, whatever other exposures there are. If our cellular energy is depleted, our immune system cannot handle all that. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. So I'm going to say cellular energy, mitochondria, like making ATP and making sure your Krebs cycle is working right and making sure that your mitochondria are not damaged is huge when it comes to all of this, because we now know the mitochondria, even though it's making 70 to 90% of our energy, we also know that it works with hormones, gets hormones inside the cells, so it increases the function of hormones, it increases the production of hormones, it modulates different aspects of the immune system. So it's incredibly involved in all of this. And so yes, consequently, we have to remove the toxins that have squashed the mitochondria, and then we have to inject the mitochondria with lots of love to get it back up online.
I love how you say with lots of love. I thought you were going to say lots of nutrients. And I really love that you said with lots of love, right? Because here's the thing I see, right? Folks are out there and there's always somebody selling something on Facebook, on TV, whatever. And mitochondrial supplements are hot, right? I'm exhausted. Let me go buy this CoQ10, lipoic acid, whatever other supplement is in there, and I'll be fine, right? But it's not that way, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Once again, it is a Band-Aid. I mean, you need to bring the mitochondria back online. You need to boost them, but it is a Band-Aid, because one of the reasons why the mitochondria are dysfunctional is because the body is telling it, hey, I need you to shut down because there's other things happening in the body and we want to protect ourselves. Right?
Yes.
And so that's part of the reason why that's happening. And then the other reason is because of these toxins that are damaging the mitochondria, poking holes in it, taking over its machinery. And so then the body's like, hey, we got to shut this down. So we got to come at it from different angles.
Yeah, so it's like we blame the mitochondria for not making enough energy. They're not doing their job, but in fact, they really are doing their job because they're shutting down to protect us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you assess people? You work with people. You're the Energy MD. You wrote the book called Fix Your Fatigue. And so how do you actually assess where to start with people, what to do, and what's causing their fatigue?
So we look at 33 different causes of fatigue and low energy. And
wait. 33. What happened to 4?
I know, right? Or you go to see your conventional doctor and they're like, oh, your thyroid's fine. I'm not sure what's wrong with you.
I'm not sure what's wrong. All right, let's talk about 33 different causes.
I know, I just kind of dropped that, yes, 33 different causes. And so half of those are deficiencies. So deficiencies in hormones like adrenals, thyroid, sex hormones, in vitamins and minerals, vitamin D, vitamin B12, magnesium, iron, deficiencies in neurotransmitters, deficiencies in lifestyle habits. So not enough sleep, not enough water, not enough good food, not enough movement. Right? So those are all those things that are deficient. And then when we're looking at the toxicities, we're looking at things like the pandemic virus or spike protein, molds, heavy metals, chemicals, radium, parasites, bacteria, yeast infections, other viruses, Lyme-type infections like Babesia, Bartonella, Ehrlichia, Anaplasma, Borrelia, sinus infections, dental infections, food allergies, inhaled allergies, negative emotional patterns, and electromagnetic fields.
Wow. I didn't count. Was that 33? I might have lost track.
It was probably close to that, yeah.
Probably close to it. That's a lot, right? And here's the thing, right? As practitioners, as you went to conventional medical school, and you didn't learn this in medical school, did you?
No.
I wonder why not.
No, I had to, I went on a search. When I got chronic fatigue And I mean, even when I was seeing integrative and functional medicine docs, and I wasn't getting the answers that I want, because generally functional medicine docs are really good at replacing the deficiencies, but the most important part of this process is the toxicity. So I'm here to encourage everybody, if you're not focused or understanding around molds, heavy metals, chemicals, parasites, and other infections, and then negative emotional patterns or trauma, I highly recommend that you're moving in that direction, because you're just going to be able to help so many more people who come through your door.
Absolutely. And if they're hanging out and they're listening to my podcast and hanging out with me, they are learning about a lot of these things, because we're bringing doctors like you in to open up the eyes to those who haven't been doing it. So just as a side, before we get into the strategies, right? What did you learn in medical school about how to help people with fatigue?
Good question. So what I learned was that 90% of my diagnosis was going to be based off history and symptoms. Mm-hmm. And that 10% was physical exam and labs. And that's still true.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So in terms of something that I learned that's actually helpful, but in terms of what can cause fatigue, we're talking about thyroid and then different organ dysfunction. So maybe it's hepatitis, maybe it's congestive heart failure, maybe it's some sort of COPD or lung disease, other chronic infections, which we haven't mentioned here. So there is some workup that can be done by the conventional provider, but most of the time those aren't the most common ones, which is why the ones that I've mentioned today are the ones that we see on a regular basis.
Yeah, so I teasingly say, and I've said this in my sales page for our upcoming event, is that it's more than just an iron deficiency or a thyroid hormone deficiency. Like, it's way more complicated than that.
Right.
So what do we do?
I forgot iron deficiency and anemia, so thanks for bringing that up.
You forgot about the most obvious one that everybody thinks of, right? Exactly. Iron deficiency and thyroid. That's the ones that you probably did learn in medical school.
Exactly. Yep.
Oh, funny. And then even iron deficiency is so much more than just not getting enough iron in the diet. But we'll go there at another time, right? But so so the other 10%, you do a lot of history, you ask a lot of questions, and then in that 10%, are there particular physical things that you're looking for? And then are there particular labs that you especially like to do, at least as a starting point?
Yes. Well, I'll answer the second one first. So in terms of a starting point, so what I found is of these 33 different causes, 75% of them can be determined by symptoms alone.
Nice.
So that's where I agree with my medical training. That's about it. No. So when people come into the program, we actually have a workbook so that they can work through these causes, and they can go through checklists for each one of these, and they can determine the ones that are based off of their symptoms. They can determine which one of those causes that they have. Now, the ones which really need labs are blood tests, like looking at vitamin B12, folate, vitamin D, iron. And then in terms of looking at some of the toxin causes, we're talking about molds or mycotoxins, heavy metals, chemicals, and a stool test. So that's about it in terms of labs that I generally recommend. And I also tell people you do not have to get labs until you're several months into the program, because so many of these causes are can be determined by their symptoms.
Great. And also, like, there's some basic, let's just say, hygiene things that we want to teach people in terms of their diet, their sleep, their stress, et cetera, and that takes care of a large number of their symptoms, right?
I mean, for the people that I'm seeing, oftentimes not so, like, they're coming and they're doing everything right, and so
they've already done those. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
But it will help the majority of people, for sure.
It will help, at least if they haven't. If they're coming in on the standard American diet and drinking 5 cups of coffee a day and eating sugar and all kinds of garbage, then, you can get them 80% there very quickly if they're willing to do the work, right?
Right. Correct.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned a couple of tests, and I want to make sure that people are clear. Obviously the blood tests, those make sense. How are you going about testing for mold, and how are you testing for the metals and the toxins?
So I do like urine testing for these. I like urine mycotoxin testing, whether it's done through Vibrant or whether it's done through Great Plains Laboratories. I think they both do a nice job. So that's urinary mycotoxins, because, you know, some people will say, well, you know, sometimes you don't get accurate results. And the reality is that all tests are imperfect. But what's important to remember is that there's always a reason when you're looking at direct measurements. So if I'm doing, I don't generally like an organic acid test. And the reason why is because it's an indirect measurement. It's telling me, hey, there might be mycotoxins here because this certain substrate is elevated and mycotoxins generally inhibit that process or whatever. But it doesn't, I always have to follow it up with a direct measurement. So when I'm looking at urinary mycotoxin test and there's mycotoxins in the urine, that is a very positive test if there is mycotoxins in the urine. If there isn't, and you have a strong suspicion, it's very possible that their drainage/detoxification pathways are clogged, and consequently, you're not going to get a positive result. Now, if you start to open up the pathways and then you retest a month or two later, and then all of a sudden you get mycotoxins, it's not like they had a new exposure. It's just because now you have those pathways open. Because the more toxins you have in the body, the more clogged those drainage/detoxification pathways are going to be.
That makes total sense.
So that, and the same thing goes for some of the other tests too. So with heavy metal test, I do like to do a DMSA provocation urine test through doctor's data. For chemicals, I'll once again Vibrant or Great Plains Laboratory. And then for stool testing, I do like the GI map or the Gutzoomer 3.0 from Vibrant.
Okay. So you're testing these now. Are you testing all of these things, or are you like managing people's money a little bit better if you don't feel like you need them all right away? Or do you feel like you need them all right away?
Well, I don't do them right away, but I do them at some point. I do want people to budget. I tell them I don't ask for much, but I do want you to spend money on these 4 tests.
On the 4 tests.
Out of these 33 different causes, 4 tests, yes, they are going to spend somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500, probably closer to $1,500 for these tests. And so it definitely, I give that to them in the projections. I put together supplements and labs, and I say you're going to spend somewhere between $200 and $600 a month on supplements and labs, depending on where you are in the program. But yeah, that's how I go about that.
Okay, what are these 4 steps? What's this 4-step process?
So the first step is to assess, right? Is to figure out what you're looking at. Because even if the research says, you give somebody B12 and their energy might improve, or you give them, like you said, 5-hour energy or caffeine or something like that, we always want to know the why, right? We want to get down to the root causes. So assess first, right? And, there's the adage, test, don't guess. Right? I changed that to assess, because I think a lot of times, if you're a practitioner who likes to run a lot of tests, that's awesome. But just know you're going to lose people because, if you give them 5 kits at the first visit, it's going to be really challenging for them to navigate each one of those kits. I would say definitely space them out. But as you get better and better at practicing, then you can do more with the assessment. So that's the first thing, is to assess. The second step is to replace the deficiencies. So you may be asking me, though, Evan, everything that you're talking about here is pointing towards the toxicities as being more important. And the answer is absolutely. Toxicities are more important. However, when you replace the adrenals and the mitochondria and the thyroid and sex hormones and B12 and vitamin D and magnesium and the lifestyle habits, everything else works better. And you're going to be able to tolerate the stress that comes from removing the toxins, because it is stressful to remove those out of the body. You're extricating this toxic matrix out of the body. So we replace the deficiencies, plus also it gives our patients a win, right? Because you're going to boost their adrenals, you're going to boost their mitochondria, you're going to boost their thyroid. We call those things the big 3, and we give them optimal doses of it, and it significantly changes how they're feeling. So that's where we start with the deficiencies in step 2. And then step 3 is in preparation for step 4. Step 3 is to open up these drainage pathways. And I keep on saying drainage/detoxification because medically we learn them as like detoxification, but with a lot of people, when you talk about detox, it's kind of like this this confusing word, and so I've started to use more drainage, where we're opening up the liver and the kidney and the lymph and the neurolymph and the bile, right? We're opening up all these different pathways to make sure that when we go into step 4, we start removing the toxins, the heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, etc., that they actually have a place to go, that they'll actually go outside the body. Otherwise, if those pathways are clogged, guess what? You start to grab some heavy metals, some chemicals, some mold, you pull it into a specific drainage pathway or the lymph or whatever, and guess what? Somebody's going to feel worse because it's going to go right back into a different compartment, and you're not going to be able to get that toxin out of the body. So generally, time that you spend in step 3 is time well spent.
And what are some of your process? Well, let me let you talk about the last one, and then we'll come back. I want to come back to the drainage one.
Sure. So then when you are doing step 4, I always like to start with molds. Incredibly important, because and you want to make sure that the immune system is functional for when you're going after infections, because you can't get rid of infections by using antibiotics or by using herbs on their own, because you have to have a somewhat intact immune system to be able to help you. And so consequently, you need to make sure that you're addressing molds, heavy metals, and chemicals before you start to go after any infections. So that's kind of the process. And for each one of these different toxins, it's going to take, 6 to 12 to 24 to 36 months to get rid of it out of the body, depending on how well somebody can tolerate some of the different supplements and the speed. I think about this process as very much, it's in chemistry, we call it the rate limiting step. But it's kind of this, if you think about it as a funnel where you're dumping these toxins into the funnel, which are these drainage pathways. If the bottom of the funnel is not open enough, you're going to overflow and you're not going to have success. So you have to make sure that the bottom of the funnel is open, so that you can, and the amount that you're dripping into that funnel of these toxins is equal to the amount that you're able to get rid of out of the bottom of the funnel. And so that's that rate that you want to find for the particular individual in order to have that slow and steady success as they're removing the toxins out of the body. It means less phone calls at night, less upset. They're going to be more committed to working with you because you're not making them feel like crap. But that's that, what we call the Goldilocks dose, that people need in order to be able to be successful long term.
Wow. So let's talk this drainage, because this sounds like a really critical piece of this, that the other the assess and the deficiencies and all that is, not so difficult as far as, knowing what to do. But what about this drainage piece? That sounds like we really, really need to master this piece.
Absolutely, and some of that just starts by getting people on a better diet, by putting them on something that's more paleo, where they're eating more meat and vegetables, and they've stopped or they've decreased their consumptions of grains, and they've stopped gluten, and they've stopped dairy, and they've decreased sugar. That is a wonderful first step. And then they start to increase their water consumption, and they start to sleep better, right? We know that the brain shrinks by 60% when we sleep, right? It's like wringing out the brain, and it's dumping its toxins then into the lymph and then into the different parts of the body. So those are two important things to then start with. And then you want to look at, what are your favorite herbs or different nutraceuticals that you can take for liver. Maybe it's glutathione if somebody's got mold. Maybe it's N-acetylcysteine if they can't tolerate glutathione. Then with the kidneys, maybe you're looking at some different kidney herbs there. There's some different complexes that I like to use. Kidney Correct by Designs for Health, or Detox One by Byron White Formulas, or KL Support by Cellcore. So there's a number of these that I like to use for liver, for kidney, for lymph. I like the BT Detox. For I know we got practitioners here, so you guys might be curious on what I'm using. BT Detox from Byron White Formulas I like, and then Lymph Active by Cellcore. And then in terms of the glymphatic system, using some sort of liposomal melatonin, really nice for, and then obviously getting better sleep is really nice for starting to drain that glymphatic system from the brain.
Wow. So let me ask you a question about this. Somebody just asked me this today, knowing that melatonin is not just about deep sleep. We always think about take melatonin at bedtime. And he said, well, if I'm taking it for more of a detox purpose, do I take it during the day? Is that going to put me out in the middle of the day?
It will.
Yeah, that's what I told him. I said, no. I said, don't. So that is strictly for nighttime. And then the lymphatics, we know that lymphatic drainage happens much more profoundly overnight. That's the time when it happens. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So thank you for sharing specific products, because we always get questions about that. And we'll have that in the show notes, guys. So if you missed that, you can go back and look in the show notes and catch some of those. And there's a lot of good products, right? We're not here to promote any one particular product or brand or anything like that. There's a lot of good products out there. And what I might use might be different from what you might use, and not because one is better than the other, because, well, I never got around to trying that one.
Right.
Yeah. So, we're opening up those channels. Do you do anything with saunas and any of the other strategies for like hyperbarics and things like that? Coffee enemas? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of some of those products. I'm definitely saunas. Obviously, if you're using infrared saunas, the wavelength also can contribute to helping get rid of some infections. So if people feel better after saunas, typically they have Lyme, and if they feel worse, oftentimes it's because they've got Epstein-Barr virus. And once again, it's all about a Goldilocks dose. And so these treatments that you're taking, I don't want to say exogenously because you're not putting them inside the body, but some of these external treatments are especially good for folks who are more sensitive. So for some of our more sensitive folks who've got like MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, they'll start off with like a minute, a couple times a week on sauna. If they can't tolerate things orally, and then they'll increase by a minute every week. And that's worked wonders for folks. And then coffee enemas can be incredibly helpful, doing them up to twice a day sometimes in some folks. Red light therapy is really nice for turning on the mitochondria. And then there's some biohacks. If you want to turn on the mitochondria, do a cold plunge. Get some cold water on your head when you're in the shower every morning. There's a number, do some vagal tones, sing, hum, scrape your tongue. There's a number of these things. Do some breath work. Yeah, I'm definitely a fan of using those. And then we have a really big mindset component in the program. I call it the energy mindset, where we're looking at gratitudes and envisioning and any sort of negative thought patterns that we have, and flipping them into positive thought patterns and asking ourselves better questions. So that's a very important part of the program as well.
I so love hearing you say that, because we focus on that a lot. And, you can have the best diet and the best detox practices and the best. And if you're in negativity and not really getting, the energetic and emotional pathways open, it's really going to deter your response.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. You said something earlier, though, I want to go back to. You said, load your mitochondria with love. Tell me about that.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I think that there's nutrients that can be incredibly helpful, whether you're looking at some of the cell core products with some of the electron donors that they have, or whether or not you're actually using some of the nutrients in a product like ATP 360 by Research Nutritionals. Those are kind of some of the big ones that I'm using. You got to give the mitochondria some love, and part of that, like I said, is removing the toxins, is managing your stress better, is having a more positive mindset, and being able to talk your way out of things, and then also having more emotional intelligence. We've got a couple of trauma coaches in our program that teach NARM, which is called Neuroaffective Relational Model for Trauma, and it's basically a mindfulness technique on understanding emotions better in the body. So, just really important, coming at the mitochondria from different angles.
Yeah, I love that. It's because it's comprehensive, and we can't just look at any one area. We can't just look at the biochemistry. We can't just look at the external things. We have to look at all of these pieces, I believe, in order to get the results that these people are coming for. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you get exponentially better results,
Yeah.
when you're working on these different things. And it took me a long time to actually come to this. My wife is a mindfulness coach and a mediator and a meditator and all this sort of stuff. And I was more like biomed guy, but then just, through different trainings and my own experience with fatigue and life in general, I realized I needed more mindset training. And so I've got mindset coaches and all this other stuff. And it's just been incredibly helpful for me.
That's amazing. So we're getting close to the end here, and I want to make sure that we've covered everything. So I want to hear from you. Do you have a few tips that you can give people, just to kind of get started in incorporating, some strategies like this for the low energy people?
Well, I think probably most of the people who are listening are doing a good job of replacing the deficiencies. I think that where I would make recommendations would be first the big three. So making sure that you're optimizing adrenal function, mitochondrial function, and thyroid. And I do a subjective ramp up when it comes to thyroid. And I actually work as a health coach online, even though I am an MD, so that I can practice across state lines, but that means that I don't prescribe. So I'm using glandulars and I'm ramping up on them. So I increase by whatever it is. I think the product I'm using right now is Priority 1, Thyroid 65, which is probably equivalent to about 15 milligrams of Armour. And so I increase by a capsule every 2 weeks until they get hyperthyroid. Now, I only do this after I replace the adrenals and the mitochondria, because both of those things together is going to make the thyroid work better. So you're going to need less thyroid glandular. But I get them to a point where they're starting to have hyperthyroid symptoms, and then I back down. So for example, if they're at like 5 capsules per day, and they've gone from 4 to 5, and then all of a sudden they start to experience heart palpitations or diarrhea or something like that, I just back off back to 4, and that's where they live until we fix the toxins, right? So that's what I have found, is that there's a delay in the thyroid testing, right? I remember when I was in residency, it was 6 weeks, I believe, or 2 months, where you give them the thyroid now, and then any sort of changes you've made, you got to wait a couple months until you recheck it. Well, that's not the best way, I believe, in what I've seen in order to treat the patient. If you want to get them better faster, this ramp up I've found to be incredibly good at getting that Goldilocks dose. I love that word, the Goldilocks dose of the thyroid, because it really does. When thyroid's better, right? What's the best anti-cholesterol medication, anti-hypertensive, immune system support, right? It's thyroid, right? So if we can optimize people's thyroid, everything else works better, increases their energy, improves their sleep, decreases their weight, etc. So I would say the big three would be important to focus on. And then the other thing is the toxins. If you don't have the education, get trained in molds, heavy metals, chemicals, and infections like Lyme and Epstein-Barr.
Awesome. Thank you. When you do so you give the glandulars and you ramp them up, and then you start working on the toxins, but does it get to the point in your practice and your experience that people then can back down off the glandulars? Do they get to the point where they don't need them anymore?
Absolutely, and that's one of my most favorite things to do. I mean, besides taking people off of their medications because they don't need them anymore. But yeah, oftentimes if somebody has a thyroid issue, in my world, 8 out of 10 times they've got Bartonella. If they also have pain on the bottom of the feet, muscle cramps, usually in the calves, usually at night, maybe some mood issues, maybe some insomnia, maybe some body pain. And so we start going after whatever infection it is, in this case, this example, Bartonella, and that what ends up happening is that they get hyperthyroid on that same dose. As you fix things, then all of a sudden they need less of these Band-Aids, even though they are natural Band-Aids. And so I'm ramping up on Bartonella support, and this was incredibly serendipitous. The first time this happened was I had somebody call me after hours, and she's like, I can't sleep, I'm super anxious, I got diarrhea, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what's happened to this person? And then I said, well, when was the last time this happened to you? Because I didn't know what was going on. And she said, when I had Graves. I was like, huh. And she was a hypothyroid person. She had Hashimoto's, and we were giving her thyroid, and I was like, oh, I guess you're hyperthyroid right now. Why don't you decrease your Armour thyroid or whatever she was taking? And she was able to wean off of her thyroid entirely. just by
Yes.
treating the Bartonella. So that's and I've seen that time and time again. I would say about half of the people who I work on who have Bartonella and low thyroid end up decreasing their thyroid dose significantly, if not completely.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It's all about going back to the body and fixing the imbalances, right? We're not talking about curing diseases or all of that. We're talking about identifying and we're balancing out the body so that the inner healing capacity of the body gets to work. And that's a clear, great example of it. So I so appreciate you being here and sharing from your wisdom. And I would say for everybody that's listening, go out and check the Energy MD podcast. Get Evan's book at Fix Your Fatigue. You probably get it on Amazon, right? And, just kind of really just ramp up on what you're doing with these things. And don't forget to really not just like, oh, this person doesn't have a mold history, let's not bother with this. They may have a mold history and they're just not sharing the right information with you and learning to ask the right questions, right? Have you ever had a moldy basement? Do you live in Portland? Well, you probably have mold if you live in Portland, right? So things like that. And then, if you live in Connecticut, likely there's something related to Lyme and Bartonella and all these other co-infections. So really opening your mind to what kind of things can be going on. But of course, really working with those basics to start, because if we have people who are eating garbage and they're not meditating and they're stressed to the max and they're not exercising, you got to start there. You can't start with fancy protocols. You got to get those things managed. So thank you. Any last words of wisdom that you want to pass on?
I think I just applaud everybody who's listening to this podcast because you guys are doing amazing work and helping these folks. And, your education isn't built in a day. You just got to learn something new every 6 to 12 months, and you'll accumulate a body of knowledge that will enable you to help more people.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So we've been listening to Dr. Evan Hirsch, and we've just put together some more of the puzzle when it relates to fatigue and energy metabolism. So I want you to just really focus on the better you are at this. And like Dr. Evan just said, study, learn. The better you are, the more successful you're going to be in your practice, the more you're willing to dig and do that really careful assessment piece right at the beginning. You're going to be able to help people who've been struggling for a long time and not getting the answers that they want. And you will, of course, feel fulfilled and your practice will thrive. I know personally when I can help people to get answers and they haven't been able to, it just feels good at the end of the day instead of just loading on more supplements or more whatever you do.